Hey, it's Norm from Tested, and today I'm reviewing the Sony NEX-5R interchangeable lens camera. This is an upgrade from last year's 5N, which was pretty much a sweet spot for this class of camera. It's an interchangeable lens camera, meaning that you can buy new lenses, it comes with a detachable lens, and it has a APS-C size sensor. So let's start off by talking about what stayed the same between the 5N and the 5R. You're going to get about the same image quality between these two cameras. This still has a 16.1 megapixel sensor inside APS-C size, which means you're going to get really good low light quality images all the way down to 100 ISO, even though I shoot about 200 ISO, and really nice depth of field. This does have a micro USB port for charging and for photo transfer, and a mini HDMI out for video out, and of course it does 1080p video recording, and Sony did not add a microphone port to this model, so you're still going to use the onboard audio. But a couple of things have changed. Primarily, there's a new sensor on the inside, so even though you're getting the same quality images, the autofocus system is actually new in the NEX-5R. The NEX-5R uses a new hybrid-based autofocus system that combines contrast detect autofocus with phase detect autofocus right in the center of the image for theoretically faster autofocus. In my tests, I didn't find that this new hybrid system was that much more noticeable, and since it only works for the center of the screen, things that are in your peripheral won't detect any faster. The second major difference in the NEX-5R is the addition of a control dial on the top of the camera. So when you're shooting in a setting like manual mode, you can have your aperture setting on the top dial, and then on the back dial, you can use your shutter setting. Unfortunately, the top dial is not programmable, so if you're shooting with Aperture Priority or Shutter Priority, you can actually only use the top dial to change your settings, and that back control dial does nothing. Sony said they would upgrade the camera with new firmware to let you customize both these dials, but that firmware still isn't out. Another thing I'm bummed about is that the back control dial with its D-pad that's not customizable either. All 4 points on its D-pad are stuck to display settings, your shooting mode, your ISO change, and your exposure compensation. Not customizable a bit. The only button that is customizable is the back button on the bottom and the function button on the top. The third thing that Sony changed is the articulating LCD on the back of the camera. There's a really great range of motion on the NEX-5R, so similar to the NEX-F3, you can shoot photos of yourself, or you can flip that screen pretty much flat down so you can shoot from high above, but Sony changed the type of touchscreen on this camera. In the NEX-5N, this is a capacitive touchscreen. On the NEX-5R, it's a resistive touchscreen. When you're just focusing on subjects, that doesn't matter so much, but when you're typing little buttons on the screen, this actually matters a lot. Actually, I had to resort to using my Nintendo DS stylus to typing on the screen at points. Finally, the biggest change to the NEX-5R is the addition of Wi-Fi. This camera has built-in Wi-Fi. What can you do with Wi-Fi? Well, first of all, you have to set up your access points. So, like I said before, I use the Nintendo DS stylus to tap in my Wi-Fi access point password because that touchscreen isn't so great. And once I logged in, you can upload your photos directly to Sony's Playmemories website. Unfortunately, these uploaded photos are resized and won't be the full 16.1 megapixel resolution. And with Wi-Fi built in, Sony has introduced apps on the NEX-5R. Yes, there are actually apps you can download. It's not a big app market. Sony has only a few apps that they've developed internally, and there's no open SDK for developers to develop their own apps, and not all apps are free. In fact, I didn't like the interface for downloading the apps and setting the apps at all. Once I've logged in, you can get something like an iOS and Android app, so you can use that as a remote viewfinder for your camera, but you have very limited settings there. You can only change a time delay or exposure compensation in certain modes. There's no video record settings for that remote viewfinder. Other apps like photo retouching and in-camera filters are kind of neat, but not something I use day to day. Now, the apps like time-lapse or cinematic photo, that's like cinemagraphs, those apps will actually cost money, ranging from $5 all the way to $10. I don't think those are really worth it when you use those features very occasionally. The built-in Wi-Fi and the addition of the second control dial on top are the biggest changes to the Sony NEX-5R, but they're just not implemented the way I'd want them to be. Without firmware updates to let you customize the apps or customize that dial, I don't think these additions are worth the extra $100 you'd be paying over the NEX-5N. If you're buying a new camera right now, I'd recommend just going with a 5N because the image quality is essentially the same. But I want to demonstrate all these features for you because there's a lot more to talk about, so we're going to sit down and go in depth with this camera. All right, so we just reviewed the Sony NEX-5R, and there was, like I said before, there's a lot more to talk about. I wanted to show you in depth all these features, especially that Wi-Fi feature. So we're sitting down here. Will, unfortunately, is out. He's on paternity leave, and also he had appendicitis. So I have a stand-in, Verlin. Yep. So we're going to talk about what's new about this camera and exactly why it's different from the camera you have, which is, yes, the NEX-5N. So, like I said, there are a couple things that changed between the 5N and the 5R, both internally and externally. Internally, so what Sony can do when they refresh their lines, they can change the sensor and they can change the processor. I think in terms of the sensor, which I'll show you guys right here, it is still that large APS-C sensor. Across most of their 3 series and their 5 series NEX lines, it's the same sensor on the insides. It's the same 16.1 megapixel camera. So when you looked at something like the NEX-C3 and then the F3 and the 5 and the 5R, you're going to get basically the same image quality across all of those cameras because it's that same size sensor, the same depth of field, same megapixel. It's a good sensor. But for the NEX-5R, what's new in here is, I mentioned, that there's a new autofocus system. So traditionally, what distinguishes the autofocus on a mirrorless camera and a DSLR is a difference between contrast detect and phase detect based autofocus system. The mirrorless cameras have traditionally used contrast detect. So something like my NEX-C3, the autofocus is not that fast. It's good enough, but if you're trying to catch a sprinting cheetah or a car, like a race car, you're going to have trouble focusing in. And the way contrast detect autofocus works is that it looks for the differences in the edges. So when you focus on the camera, I can show you right now, and you can actually see, or in a traditional camera, you can see that it zooms in a little bit and out. It kind of does a little bit of a fuzzy zoom in. So if I have something out of focus, it kind of zooms in and out right there. What it's doing is that it's quickly zooming in and out so it can detect where the edges are and looking for the contrast between here the green and the black in the background. That is not as fast as something that's phase-based. Those have typically been relegated to the DSLR, high-end DSLR cameras. Sony and some other camera makers have now this hybrid autofocus system where if you look on here, there are these cross hatches right in the center, only in the center. These are actually on the actual sensor itself, the camera sensor, and in that center part of the sensor are special receptors that can detect phase change. And so theoretically, it is a faster autofocus. Unfortunately, in this camera, because it's a hybrid system, it's not 100% phase-based. It still actually uses the contrast detect autofocus and uses the phase just to lock in initially, and then uses the contrast-based autofocus to really find where that focus point is. So it's not as fast as a DSLR still. Some other thing to notice is that even though the autofocus system, the new hybrid focus system, is in the sensor, you have to use new lenses from Sony. So, for example, right now you can see these crosshatches on the camera that's indicating the phase-based auto detect, and I can show you if I focus on this Android, like it knows to only focus in on the center part. Anything in the peripheral, if I wanted to focus on my hand, it would actually still choose the center, even if my hand is closer. Yeah. If I pop off the lens on my old camera, this is the same SCL 1855, so it's 18 millimeter, 55 millimeter, and I pop this on the new camera. You can do that? Which you can do this. You'll see that those cross hatches are gone now. That's because the firmware, and there's actually firmware for lenses, isn't updated on this lens. Sony has released firmware updates for the older 18mm, 55mm lenses that you can actually download if you want to use your old E-mount lenses on this camera with the hybrid autofocus system. So I'm going to pop this back on.
That sounds good.
So yes, that's the biggest change with the internal sensor. Image quality-wise, it is pretty much exactly the same. Great low light still, and all the way down, I think 100 ISO to 25,000 ISO. In my tests, 800 ISO, still very usable. 1600 ISO, still usable, but anything above that, once you're in the 3200 ISO range in the dark, it's going to get a little bit grainy.
What about that control dial there? Yeah, right there.
Yeah, so the second big change in the 5R is this control dial. And this is the thing that I had the most high hopes for, because Sony's NEX-7, for example, has 2 control dials on top, and the NEX-6 has a control dial that's actually locked underneath the shutter button. The 5N that you have did not have this control dial. This is new. And theoretically, that then grants 2 modes of control. You have the control ring here, and also the control dial on top. Oh. When you're shooting in manual, you see I'm in manual right now, it'll automatically set, and this is something that I am a little disappointed by, automatically set the back ring as your shutter speed. So I'm changing shutter right now. Right, there goes. And then, as you can see, it says that my top control dial is set to AV. That's for aperture. And I'm now changing aperture right there. That's handy. That's useful. And that's something I would definitely want to use it for. But if I'm shooting in something that's not full manual mode, I'm going to go to something like Aperture Priority, which I like also, if I don't want to deal with shutter speeds. You can only change your aperture then with this top control dial. That's what it says, AV on top, that's your aperture. And right now this control dial then does nothing. And ideally, I would want to be able to program it so I can, for example, have this be my aperture or this be my aperture, have both be the aperture setting, or have this default to something that's secondary, that's still useful. For example, the exposure compensation.
Right.
Otherwise, I would have to click down here and then change that after clicking. I want to have this dial. This is not programmable at all with the current software. At CES, their Sony rep told me that this would be controllable, but I've checked all the websites and there's no software upgrade that I can find that lets me program these dials. And then also back here on this back control dial, you can see there's a permanent display here. It says display, that's the shooting mode, ISO, and exposure comp. These are locked in. For something like my NEX-C3, display was locked in, but actually all the bottom 3 were programmable, and these are actually not programmable over on the 5R. The only programmable button is this bottom button right here, and the function button, which lets me cycle through a series of options. I couldn't find a way to change the programmable dial. I mean, it's okay right now because ISO is what I typically want to change, and exposure comp is what I want to change, but I then have nothing to change access white balance quickly. And right now I'm messing around with trying white balance, and I want to be able to quickly access that, so I have to program that to the function button or something.
All right, and then of course there's the new thing, Wi-Fi.
Touchscreen, yep.
Oh, I mean touchscreen?
So there is also a change with the touchscreen. The 5N had a capacitive touchscreen. I don't know how much you use it. Yeah, it does work. It does work to track subjects. So for example, if back here, if I touch this Android, it knows that it wants to track that, and if I move, or if the Android itself, or if the subject itself moves, it actually tracks that. So touch to focus still works, and this is like a gentle touch right now. A gentle touch will still work. That's okay. I mean, the change from capacitive to resistive in that sense was totally fine. What was terrible is when I'm actually going through the menus and typing in on a QWERTY keyboard, which I'd have to because of Wi-Fi. Yeah. That's right. The third biggest thing that's changed is the addition of Wi-Fi. So you can set up your access points like you would typically do a smartphone. And I've already set up our local access point here. You can do 2 things primarily with Wi-Fi. One is that you can send directly to your smartphone using a smartphone app. So I have both my Android and my iOS phone here. I'm going to show you the one button Smart Send. So on the bottom right now, let me cancel the tracking focus. There's a Wi-Fi button, and I could send just this image. So I'm going to try that. And then, I have a little bit of an error. I think it's because I'm using a memory card that I've used with other devices. Let me link, first of all, my phone with this with the camera. So on an iOS device, it's actually less easy to use. It's more easy to use on an Android device than on an iOS device, and that's because on the Android app, I can actually connect to the camera within the app. So if I launch the Sony Playmemories app, right here, Playmemories Mobile, I have it set up so that on the NEX-5R, it will automatically find it because I've connected before, and it will start a tether. So it can send one image here from the camera or all the images from the camera to here, and it's actually taking, this is actually how long it typically takes to connect, and they're literally right next to each other. The camera's acting as a hotspot, and this is an image I think I just took. If I wanted to copy this, I can copy, and there it goes. It's sharing. It won't be the full-size image. It's actually scaled down to, I think, 16 by 1080, so 1080p, but not a 19:6 aspect ratio. And I couldn't find a way to transfer the full image over. I'm going to disconnect, and I'm going to actually try to connect it to my iPhone. It's worse on iOS devices because I have to manually connect the Wi-Fi in settings, and it can't automatically connect in that app. So if you look here, I have to first go onto Wi-Fi and turn Wi-Fi on. If I load up just the Playmemories app, it won't automatically detect. So I have to connect then to here, and now it's connected on the camera. It's saying sharing on the camera. Again, takes a little bit of time. And there it's connected, and so I can launch the Playmemories Mobile, searching for device, and same thing there. So while on the Android device, I could just launch the Sony app and it automatically connects to that Wi-Fi network. On iOS, I have to go to settings and then change that. Let me copy this as well. And then, oh, see, an error again. And I guess I think it still thinks it is tethered to the Android device. So a little buggy. So that's one of the things you can do with Wi-Fi.
Okay.
The other thing you can do is run apps. So let me quit out of here.
Apps.
And show you the app selection. There is actually an app store for a camera. I know, weird. So there's a new application menu button here, and I can just tap that because it's a touchscreen. There it goes. And it'll show you some apps, and I can load up their store. So now it's looking for an access point. For the access point in here, in our office. And again, every time I've done this, it actually never directly connects the first time. I actually have to go into settings. It takes a long time. Come on, find that access point.
Really?
Find it. No I'm still batting 100 on not being able to find that access point. So you see this is actually, this button here, network settings, that's actually a tappable button, and here's where the resistive touchscreen is not so great. I have to hit that twice. And I'm actually finding I'm using a DS stylus to actually hit this. So I'm going to connect to our local office access point. There it goes. It's connected. I'm going to back out of that. And now it's finally loading. And it's actually, I think this is just an encrypted web page that Sony has set up. So I can show you, for example, all of the apps that are available.
Okay.
Some I mentioned earlier are free. So that direct upload one, which lets you directly upload to Sony's Playmemories website. I'll demonstrate that in just a second. But for something like this cinematic photo, which I have set up a new account for, to purchase that, you have to go to Purchase, and then hopefully it will not show my email address or my private email address. Still loading, still loading. Oh, there goes my private email address. So give me 1 second.
$5.
To get rid of that. And I can show you why this typing scheme is so frustrating.
Oh my God, it's expensive.
Okay, so when you first when you go to buy an app, you have to sign in to Sony Playmemories, and it actually has this QWERTY keyboard here. And if I wanted to type in my email address to log in, for example, I'm just going to use norman@tested.com, I'm already getting errors. Like, this is worse than worse than the very first Android phone in terms of its keyboard. But using the stylus, I can kind of do it. Yeah, not very responsive. Done. Done. And look, this basically is just a web browser
Yeah.
on the phone. I mean, that's how unpolished this interface is to log in to purchase apps. You only have to do this to purchase apps and to upload onto the Sony's Playmemories site. And there's a very limited selection of apps right now. There's the time-lapse app, there's your image adjusting app. When we reviewed the Sony RX100, that one had built-in modes for the photo retouching. If you wanted like the color spotlight, that's actually an app here. So I'm going to actually load an app for you, and I'll load the most useful app, which is the Smart Remote one. So here's Smart Remote, and now it's on Wi-Fi standby again. So if I'm going to go back onto my iOS device and log back in. So if you wanted to use your smartphone as a remote viewfinder, this is every time you have to do this. This is something you have to do every time, is pair the phone with the camera. Wait, there it goes. I think it's paired. Launch Playmemories, detects, and then finally, it will have the shutter. And
Wow.
I'll show you what that delay looks like and what those options look like. Oh, and it's not even doing landscape mode. Okay, that's fine. We'll do portrait orientation. There it goes. It's actually, the lag isn't that bad.
Oh.
Because it's obviously faster on that left side with directly on the sensor. And I can take a picture. I can't focus. I can't touch the focus here at all.
Really?
I can still, nope, no touch to focus. I can tap. There it goes. There's a little focus. And I can take a picture by hitting the button. It vibrates and actually saves it to my camera roll immediately. If I go back, I'll show you some of the setting options, very minimal setting options. You have your EV, because I'm in Aperture Priority, so I
Sure.
can actually do exposure compensation, which is nice. So I can adjust one stop, 2/3 of a stop down. I can do a time delay, and I can do a review check, what happens
That's
after I
limited.
click that shutter button. But nowhere in here can I start video recording, can I tap to focus, or can I change any of the other options like ISO or white balance, which would be very useful if I'm using this actually as a remote shutter. The range is standard Wi-Fi range. I've tried it from one long hallway about like 40 feet across, and it still works. But it's not something that I actually saw myself really using because of how limited that is.
Right.
So I'm going to go show you the other apps right now. Let me exit out of this. And right now I'm in the application, so every time I want to quit out of the app, I have to actually quit out and then launch another app. And so I'll show you something like a picture effect mode. This was a feature that was built into Sony's previous cameras, but they chose not to build it into this one because they wanted to give you the full app experience of downloading the app. So you can do your pop color and your toy camera modes. And there's actually quite a few options in here. For example, the one I think that's kind of cool is the pop color. No, maybe not the pop color. The color isolation one. If I can,
Yeah.
Nope, don't want to back out of the app. There's a partial color. That's what I want to do. So if I want to just show green, and everything else is monochrome, then that looks kind of cool. But you can actually select specific colors, and there are more options for this mode. So for example, if I want to have two partial colors, green and, I can have green and blue, and something that's green and blue, or yellow, red,
Blue.
green and blue. Let's see if this works. Then blues will also show up as well. It's kind of a neat feature. Again, it's something that they're adopting from smartphones and having apps on smartphones, being able to do Instagram filters and other filters like that. Nothing that affects the core functionality of this camera. So that's it for this Sony NEX-5R. That Wi-Fi experience, I would say, is pretty poor. Yeah, not good at all. And as a camera itself, it performs just fine. If you don't think about the apps, don't think about those Wi-Fi features. The extra dial is useful in that full manual mode, but without the firmware update that lets you program both the control dial and the top control dial. And without more apps or an open SDK, there's no real reason to buy this camera over the 5N, which is now heavily discounted online. So that's it with the Sony NEX-5R. Hope that gives you a good sense of what it feels like to actually use this camera. I think it's still a decent camera, but it's not exactly what I hoped it would be. You'll find more sample photos, more reviews on tested.com. I'm Norm.
I'm Verlin.
We'll see you guys next time.